Madam President of the University of the Bahamas, Janine Horta, the Chairman and members of the board of the Global Interdependence Center, distinguished leadership of the University of the Bahamas, members of the advisory board of the Government and Public Policy Institute, conference guests, attendees, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As scattered as you are, I don't mind saying to you that you look good. Yes, you look good. In fact, you should turn to somebody and tell them, I don't care what you say, I look good. Yeah. Now, human beings are sometimes prone to arrogance, and so you should turn back and say, yeah, but I look better. For almost 2 years, the Government and Public Policy Institute at the University of the Bahamas, responsible for promoting public policy dialogue, public policy research, and providing training in areas of public policy, discussed with and teamed up with the Global Interdependence Center to host the center's first conference outside of the United States of America. The Global Interdependence Center is a Philadelphia-based nonprofit organization that holds conferences and programming to increase global dialogue and promote free trade in order to improve cooperation and understanding among nation states with the goal of reducing international conflicts and improving worldwide living standards. And so we are absolutely delighted that almost 2 years later, we are here, and we should give ourselves an applause. We are delighted that so many of you have responded to our invitation to participate in today's day conference under the theme Climate, Currency, and I don't know why the other word is escaping me. Central bank, only because the governor was here, yes. And we have a wonderful lineup of speakers for you, and we are delighted that so many of them have been available to participate today. So I want to ask now my boss and the president of the University of the Bahamas, Janine Horta, to come and welcome you.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. Protocol has been established, but allow me please to recognize with great pleasure the ministers who are attending, the Governor's Central Bank, and all of you who are visiting from the United States and elsewhere to this very exciting partnership between the University of the Bahamas and GIC. So we're very happy to welcome you this morning, and we are delighted that GIC has partnered with UB's Government and Public Policy Institute in the delivery of the public conference. GIBBI provides research, consultancy, and training services in areas of public policy to impact the good governance, prosperity, and sustainable development of the Bahamas, the Caribbean region, and beyond. Today, throughout the various seminars, you'll be addressing themes that are really important here at the university and for the country, including the enhancements and impediments to economic growth, the banking ecosystem of the Caribbean, including the U.S. governance impact on the region, payment systems and de-risking. Also on the agenda, I read, are topics related to currency issues surrounding the Bahamian dollar, the U.S. dollar, and central bank digital currencies, such as the sand dollar, and exploration of the impact of climate change, including hurricanes, of which we've had a few, and sea level rise through the lens of risk management. These are important issues within the Bahamas, within the global financial system. This forum, convening eminent financial leaders and academics today, serve our university's core mission of contributing to national development. Some of you may not know this, but we're a country that often outperforms on the global stage relative to our small population. And as such, we are committed to developing this level of excellence across many areas of our economy and the academy. Forums like this one reflect our commitment to that goal. In addition, here at the university, we've been expanding and are revisiting programs such as Small Island Sustainability, a broad program that intends to provide education that is both broad and deep enough so that we prepare our students to take on significant leadership roles in a number of fields, whether renewable energy, waste management, project planning, disaster relief. So we're looking at developing academic programs that prepare our graduates to support the country. We are also looking at developing, in addition to our core baccalaureate degrees and our graduate degrees, a number of short courses in partnerships with others that help upskill the labor force in the country. So whether we now have a partnership with the University of Cambridge on cryptocurrency. We've launched a project, a sort of a boot camp style project on data analytics. And we're doing everything that we can to provide both the traditional undergraduate education of high quality and what I'm going to call, actually upskilling the labor force and providing opportunities for people, whether they're in the undergraduate degree program or in the labor force, to acquire those skills that are needed to build a resilient economy for the future. And we see our partnership with you this morning and your presence here as a testimony to your willingness to work with us as we continue to serve our mission, which is to grow national development and support the Bahamas. Thank you very much. I wish you a very happy conference.
Jill wanted me to let you know that this is GIC's first conference in the Bahamas, not outside the United States of America. But if you have your first conference in the Bahamas, you've had your first conference outside of the United States of America. Thank you very much, Jill. Climate features heavily in the global dialogue these days, for sure. For the Bahamas, our Prime Minister has led the charge to highlight this as an existential issue for countries like ourselves. When you are 2 feet in water rise from being non-existent, you don't treat this like a nonchalant issue. You treat it as an existential issue. And so for that reason, it was important for us to be able to have the minister responsible for environment come to bring some remarks to you on this important occasion. So I now ask you to welcome with me the Honorable Vaughn Miller, Minister of Environment.
Thank you. I stand on the established protocol, and if you permit me, I'll adjust this mic a little bit. Okay. Should be good. Good. Nonetheless, to the one who presides, to former Member of Parliament, Cabinet Minister, Minister Lang, to my Cabinet colleague, Minister Alcides, and each of you in your respective places, it's an honor to be here. Those of you visiting our country, we're happy to have you, and we ask that whatever you experience, that it will not be bad, but it may be a little below what you expect. You can tell Minister Lang, tell myself, tell Minister Alcides, tell the Bahamian. But all of the wonderful experiences that you will have, that you are having and will continue to have, if you wish to share with us, you can, but you do not have to. But when you leave our shores, we ask that you please, please share it with others. And I'd like to say, tell Peter to tell Paul, and tell Paul to tell Saul, and to tell Saul to tell them all, it's still better in the Bahamas. And so it's an honor to have you in our country. And as it relates to climate change and what is happening with the environment, the last 8 years were the hottest on record. Each of the past 4 decades, they have been warmer than the one that preceded it. Last summer, the Bahamas, we recorded ocean temperatures in excess of 93 degrees Fahrenheit that resulted in massive coral reef die-offs across our archipelago. This is in addition to the continued spread of Skittle D, stony coral tissue loss disease, that our reef builders have been exposed to since 2019. Needless to say, climate change continues to be the single biggest challenge of our generation. I'm extremely encouraged to stand among this group of highly trained and motivated professionals pursuing to elevate the public policy discourse on those matters that impact our population most. Climate change is one such issue, and this conference is most timely. The Bahamas became signatory to the Paris Agreement in 2016. A major feature of that agreement is to keep the rise in global temperatures well below 1.5 degrees Celsius based on pre-industrial levels. This is not an arbitrary number. The Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, IPCC, they've warned that exceeding the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit would have irreversible impacts on people, species, and ecosystems. Those people, species, and ecosystems are our people, our endemic species, and our unique ecosystems. What is more troubling is that it's becoming more and more evident that before the climate can stabilize at 1.5 degrees Celsius, we will likely overshoot it. I applaud your efforts to craft a vision for a comprehensive and forward-thinking agenda that will not only mitigate our vulnerabilities, but also position our country as a global exemplar of climate resilience and sustainable development. Central to that vision must be a commitment to develop climate-resilient infrastructure that will fortify our communities and our critical assets against the ravages of extreme weather events. And all of us in the Bahamas, we know but extreme weather events. A name we do not even like to hear, hate to think about, Dorian, that monster of a hurricane. By necessity, we are obliged to invest in robust coastal defenses, sustainable energy projects, and climate-adaptive urban planning to ensure the long-term resilience of our nation. Climate change presents one of the most pressing challenges of our time, with far-reaching implications for our environment, economy, and our society at large. The urgency of addressing this existential threat, it requires bold and innovative solutions that transcend borders and disciplines. The Bahamas, our beloved archipelago, with its rich natural heritage and vulnerability to climate-related risks, stands at the forefront of this global conversation. As a nation intricately intertwined with the ocean and dependent on its delicate balance, we recognize the imperative of taking proactive measures to mitigate the impacts of climate change and build resilience in our economy and our communities. It is indeed crucial that our Bahamian researchers, academics, and professionals look closely at climate change, look at its impacts on our economy, our social fabric, our cultural identity, and our environment to determine the best pathways to mitigate its impacts locally and adapt to those things that we cannot change. For decades, our international partners have promised to address this most fundamental issue that is threatening our very existence. Some needed assistance have landed on our shores, some, but that some has not been nearly enough to facilitate the absolute paradigm shift necessary to ensure that the Bahamas continues on its path to sustainable development and prosperity. We need thought leaders. We need academics. We need researchers, policymakers, and community and business leaders to put their collective shoulders to the wheel. All hands on deck are needed. We all need to connect the dots that will ensure our collective success and drive the actions that will lead us to the necessary advancements so that the next generation will be proud of us, those whom the preambles of our Constitution speak of, the inheritors and successors. We need the results of Bahamian-focused research to drive our policy decision-making processes. As I close, Minister Lang is a preacher, I'm a preacher, and we usually have several closes, but I only have one today. As the minister responsible for the environment and natural resources in the Bahamas, I wish to assure you that we are intentional about recruiting the best talent to address our nation's challenges. So I call upon you today to be intentional about your dialogue. Your ideas will form the basis of our next National Development Plan. I look forward to the discourse today, and I'm excited to learn of products of this gathering. I wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And if you wake him up 3 o'clock in the morning, that same passion and authenticity is exactly what you will get on this issue, on this subject. You've heard from the president of the university. You've heard from the Minister of Environment. Our partner, the GIC, has here its chair, and I'm going to invite him right now to bring you some welcome remarks before we hear from our next speaker, Mr. William Kennedy, CIO, Risk Bridge Advisors, and Board Chair of GIC. Mr. Kennedy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And on behalf of the Global Interdependence Center and our board of directors, we welcome all of you. A special thanks to the University of Bahamas and the team here. What great partnership. And it has been 2 long years in the making, but we finally did it, Zhivargo, so thank you. Actually, we could not have a better spokesperson for the GIC than Zhivargo. And the way he described our purpose and our mission. We have been in existence for 48 years. And over that 48 years, we have been a nonpartisan organization committed to the exploration of interdependent topics, dealing mainly with monetary policy, fiscal policy, trade, but also exogenous events that impact world economies, climate being an important one of those exogenous events. We host about 12 to 15 events every year, very similar to this one, around the world. And during those events, it's very important that we always take the opportunity to explore both sides or all sides of a topic or an issue. We're neutral in our approach, and we hope to bring thought leaders together in forums to explore those topics. And so I just wanted to highlight 3 other events we have taking place this year in 2024. In June, on June 28th, we will continue our central banking series. We will be in Paris with our partners at the Banque de France, and that program is currently open and available for participants. We will have our one of our signature events, which is the Rocky Mountain Forum, held in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. That will be on July 10th. And within the GIC, we have a very special organization known as the College of Central Bankers. This is a forum of former central bank leaders and monetary policymakers who have retired from their positions. They've joined as fellows of the College of Central Bank. We're holding our first symposium of the College of Central Bank in December. It'll be December 3rd and 4th in New York City. So there'll be more information coming from that. We welcome all of you. If you happen to be in the neighborhood, please feel free to join us for that. But we thank you for this opportunity to partner with you and be with you here today. Our promise to you is that today you will have very high-level dialogue, high-level discussion, and an excellent opportunity to network with experts in these fields to address these important issues around climate, currency, and central banking. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Zhivargo. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. If I'm not mistaken, are 3 of us from the University of Western Ontario? So I graduated from the University of Western Ontario in London, Canada. So did the governor. Governor, you went to Western, that's right. And our next speaker also did so. And so I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Senator the Honorable Michael Alkitis, our Minister of Economic Affairs.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lang, and good morning to all. Minister Lang said that we have a saying in the Bahamas, the Family Islands. We also have a saying, protocol having been established, it tends to shorten the speeches. So I would just greet my cabinet colleague, president of the university, former Minister of Finance, and executive director of the University of Bahamas Government and Public Policy Institute, Mr. Lang, distinguished professors, policymakers, private sector experts, business leaders, students, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is indeed a pleasure for me to welcome all of you to this Global Interdependence Center and Government Public Policy Conference on Climate, Currency, and Central Banks. I also want to extend special thanks and appreciation to Mr. Lang, the Executive Director of the Government and Public Policy Institute, and his team here at the University of the Bahamas for organizing this very important and timely event in collaboration with the team at the Global Interdependence Center. To our distinguished guests, thought leaders, policymakers, professors, and faculty from the University and University of the Bahamas and other universities, to our guests from the private sector, and to our students. This conference promises to be inspirational, innovative, insightful, informative, and most of all, transformative. You will be given the opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue and explore the feasible solutions to the global challenges faced in climate change, finance, and economics. It is only through collaboration, partnerships, and joint effort that we will be able to achieve our goal of successfully combating climate change. So we look forward to a wonderful and an enriching time during the course of the day. Last week, as we watched the national news, we saw a very unusual event which had reportedly occurred on the islands of Eleuthera and Exuma. The video footage showed what appeared to be a hailstorm in effect, with ice pellets, rain, and wind. Residents and tourists alike were startled and amazed at this incident. But recently, forecasters have accurately predicted extreme weather conditions with severe weather systems occurring more and more frequently within our historically cool and uneventful winter months here in the Bahamas. These dangerous meteorological phenomena are undoubtedly the result of climate change. Climate change is real, ladies and gentlemen. We have experienced, as my colleague referenced, Hurricane Dorian and its dreadful effects, an historically ferocious storm from which we continue to recover in many ways. And so it is evident that climate change has the potential to cause major infrastructural damage, serious social disruption and dislocation, financial loss, loss of human life, and a significant reduction in economic activity. As a small island developing nation, the Bahamas is positioned on the front lines of the climate crisis. We recognize that not only does climate change pose an existential threat to life as we know it and life as we enjoy it, but it transcends our geographical borders and impacts all nations regardless of economic status or size. In order to make a significant impact within our borders as well as within the international arena, this administration has made climate change a top priority. By doing so, we send a strong message that we are determined to play a critical and substantive role in advocating for and advancing effective climate action. We have chosen to act now by pledging to conserve and preserve our people, our land, and sea to ensure that we leave behind a healthy and sustainable planet for future generations. Furthermore, we are also committed to advocating on the global and regional platforms for climate action as we aim to build our climate resilience and sustainability frameworks. During the past 2 years, Prime Minister Philip Davis has made strong appeals to the international financial community for urgent action. Action that will bring about reforms to the global financial system for the integration of a robust climate finance framework that would unlock and enhance access to affordable climate finance. Such reforms would also allow the multilateral development banks and other financing institutions to take into account the climate risk and climate vulnerabilities of small island developing states during the decision-making process. One of our landmark achievements in support of changes to the global financial architecture and the sustainable development of the social and environmental dimensions has been the approval of 3 historic climate change documents in October 2023. During the regional summit held at the Atlantis, the Declaration of the Bahamas on Climate Finance in the Americas, the Nassau Declaration, and the Inter-American Climate Action Plan 2023 to 2030 were adopted by consensus and approved by acclamation by the countries of the Caribbean and the Americas. As intended, these documents will have a profound and lasting impact, serving as a blueprint and point of reference to represent a common position of countries in the region in future climate deliberations and negotiations. You would agree with me that climate finance transparency is critical in engaging both public and private finance institutions in advancing the implementation of climate policies and initiatives, analyzing the financing gaps, and mobilizing additional funds for mitigation and adaptation purposes. Therefore, we have collaborated with the World Bank to implement an initiative called Climate Budget Tagging. This is a tool used for monitoring and tracking of climate-related expenditures in our national budget system. It provides comprehensive data on climate-relevant spending, enabling the government to make informed decisions and prioritize climate investments. During September 2023, the Prime Minister announced the launch of an ambitious new program at the Clinton Global Initiative, aimed at addressing climate change and its far-reaching impacts on the Bahamas. Known as the Bahamas Sustainable Investment Program, the goal is to raise $500 million to bridge the climate financing gap by tapping into regional and global capital markets. The funds will be directed towards crucial areas such as climate-resilient infrastructure, coastal conservation, clean energy transition, and more. As this administration aims to sustain and retain our natural, human, and capital resources, you should be aware of the fact that our ministries and agencies are engaged in a number of climate-related projects, and there are many others still in the pipelines. I'll mention a few. The passage and enforcement of the Climate Change and Carbon Markets Initiative Act 2022, and the drafting of the accompanying regulations to govern and regulate the carbon credits industry and markets. The IDB-funded Climate Resilient Coastal Management and Infrastructure Program, a $35 million program aimed at building resilience to coastal risk through sustainable coastal protection, including natural infrastructure and integrated management of the coast. The Ministry of Energy and Transport, through the execution of an $80 million IDB project designed to aid in the transition to renewable energy, will revamp power generation in New Providence to include the use of microgrids, clean fuel, and renewables. And we have also allocated $22 million for the adoption of solar technologies on sites in Maguana, Inagua, Crooked Island, Acklands, and Long Key. And last but not least, we are in negotiations to reduce the carbon footprint of the Bahamas Power and Light and make electricity more affordable. Ladies and gentlemen, partnerships are important and have a rippling effect. It has the ability to change not only the lives of the people involved, but also the lives of all those around them. Partnership is necessary to win the fight against climate change. Partnerships requires the convergence of thoughts, dialogue, the communication of ideas, and the development of comprehensive and effective policies to derive well-defined solutions needed to address climate challenges. The climate crisis is not a challenge that we can face alone. Alliances must be forged with the public and private sectors, and even with our students who tend to be more brave and innovative. And we must strengthen our global and regional partnerships as we continue to advocate for effective action and decisive global cooperation to address the escalating concerns of climate change. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have the luxury of time, and we must work together to achieve this common goal. The stakes, as we all know, are extremely high. The climate crisis affects our potential prosperity and our people's lives, both now and far into the future. So I invite us all to, together, let's pave a resilient and sustainable path towards a brighter and prosperous tomorrow. I wish you an exciting, engaging, and productive conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Can I ask you all to just stand for 1 minute, please? Yeah. Get that blood circulating. You've heard a lot of substantive information. Yeah, do a little stretch. Smile, grin with somebody, and tell them hi again. Super. Y'all still look good. In fact, you look better than you looked an hour ago. So I did mention that myself, Governor Rolle, and Minister Alcides went to the University of Western Ontario. But we are also alumni of this great institution right here. Right here. So every time I think of our next speaker, I like to brag to people that he was a double major here and got distinction in both, because he's a bright, very bright gentleman. But we are so proud of him and so delighted to have with us today the governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas to speak on an initiative that represents the very first central bank issued digital currency in the world. Please welcome Governor John Road.
I'm going to try and show a video first. If it doesn't work, then we'll just move into the slides. Well, we'll return to these if time permits, but what I wanted to show was first-hand testimonials by Bahamians in using the sand dollar, as well as some of the experiences around how the sand dollar works. You don't, streaming doesn't work on Zoom, so that's fine. So what we'll do is we'll just move into the rest of the presentation, and I'll start off by just giving an overview of the sand dollar. So this format of my presentation is a little bit different from what I usually do, but I'll do that so that you can get an appreciation for how this digital currency works, and then we get into some of the policy discussions around how we move from the present to adoptions and the future. Okay, so we can switch to the slide presentation at the back. Okay. We have the click. The slide controller. Yeah, okay. Let's go full screen. And okay. So what I will do is just take you through how we got to where we are with the digital currency and issues which we think are very important going forward around adoption and use of the sand dollar. So we've had our videos, good. Don't worry, that was unreasonable, generous 5 minutes that those videos were taken. But what I wanted to show in those videos were basically people describing their experiences to get the feel for the fact that the idea of people using their phones to pay for goods and services and that general technology is new in the Bahamas. It has nothing to do with central bank digital currency. We don't use QR code, scan, and pay technology from a mobile device. So this is really introducing people to that. And we get some of that experience from the testimonials as well as the experience of how they can now be integrated through their mobile wallets with the banking system. But the sand dollar is nothing more than the digital version of physical cash. So it is digital cash. It's not deposits, it is digital cash. And I stress that because a lot of the discussions around central bank digital currencies focus on whether there is a tension between digital money, digital central bank money, and banking deposits. If you design it with the considerations that we've taken on board, it doesn't resemble a deposit. And even if you read carefully between the lines in most regulations around electronic money, that distinction is deliberate. It's, as I said, it's mobile phone based and non-interest bearing. And that's not a feature that is unique to Sandor. That is a feature that is, in general, a part of how the electronic money are expected to be used in any setting. By design, we took very careful consideration to regulatory issues regarding the way people interact with financial system for deposits and other services. And so the anti-money laundering and other due diligence infrastructure is similar, just as robust. And in this respect, we distinguish between individuals in terms of how they get onboarded businesses. And realistically, we don't try to erect a barricade that would exclude visitors from having access to the digital currency. So even though we list visitors here as a separate category, they're the same individuals. So technically there are two categories, or individuals, or the P, and the businesses and the government, who you can think of as more the transactors on the receiving side of payments in commerce, for the most part. We've also initially, and I like to say to people, this is more of a placeholder, but we do define transactions and holding limits for the digital currency. And for individuals, just to align again with the global concept of stored value products, low value stored value products having minimal to zero due diligence requirements for the use of those. This is the equivalent of a tier 1 access for central bank digital currency or any electronic money in the Bahamas. So any of you can download a mobile app now from one of our mobile payment providers, and in the time that your data speed connection and other services permit, you can be enabled and activated to use a tier 1 Sand Dollar wallet or the equivalent of that in any of the mobile payment space. And then in the other case, individuals can go into tier 2, which means that we've gone through the due diligence that would apply if you went in and you opened up a bank account. And so at a tier 2 level, there is equivalence in terms of the ease of moving through the financial system in and out of mobile wallets and banking accounts. Tier 3, we've assigned to businesses, particularly only for the level of transactions and holdings that we would permit. The other thing now is how does one get into this process? I started to discuss it, but we created a landing page on the mobile app where today, that will change very soon. Individuals go in, they select a provider because the central bank is not in the business of providing that end-point customer service. So they would select a provider, and they would get access to a wallet depending on the level of due diligence that they undergo. The businesses, they would go through, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, they go through some level of KYC that is typical of any commercial entity establishing a financial relationship with a financial institution. And this was a very good experience for us because it got us to appreciate the fact that, particularly in family island communities, we have to focus a lot on the regulatory requirement and the process of businesses onboarding for financial services. And through the experience, we have been able to provide for some of that simplification in terms of how individuals in their personal capacity can gain access to accounts that would facilitate their businesses. And so that basically just streamlines the kind of identification and other documentation that you go through. If you're like me, or these honorable ministers, and you're considered a politically exposed person, life is not easy, so this doesn't apply for you. But we're working on that in a different arena. So in terms of making payments, the most simple way today is using the scan and pay, using the QR code. We, during the initial pilot, also had what we call a card, where the card basically has imprinted codes and it generated random passwords. So it's a two-factor authentication process for payments. And so that enabled individuals with cards to also participate. And we think that's important in terms of how we preserve it around some of the financial inclusion aspects going forward and concerns that people might have around whether they're comfortable using a smart device. And so this is something that we do want to sustain and even allow fintechs in the future to resolve some of the issues around how that's used. If, and beyond the ways in which those payment methods are supposed to work, and we tend to use those to help define what is an interoperable payment app, whether it's a reference app which the central bank has developed or an app that any of the financial institutions has developed but is tied into the sand dollar space. So they, in addition to these standard features, they can add bells and whistles. And so the experience sometimes look additionally enhanced relative to what's happening in the central bank space. So if you're seeing the videos, you'd see more of the information here around how individuals with the complete setup can top up their wallets or redeem digital currency through the connection that the central bank provides for the ACH. And it's no different than how anyone would go online today and set up a third-party payment in the online banking system. They can complete and send monies. That's the only way that I get monies in and out of my wallet. I was shocked the other day because I rushed at about 3-something in the afternoon and made the request. And I didn't expect to see the top up until the next day, but by about 5 o'clock it was there. That's not the target that we're aiming for, though. We want to get the entire financial system and payment system to real time. So that's a project that we're layering on, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So it's not just in the mobile wallet space that people get the real-time experience. But for now, the system allows individuals to do a top-up or redemption through the online banking platforms, and that's not the same costly expense as some individuals who may be using a credit or a debit card to add funds to a mobile wallet. So that's where we are. And the focus is on making certain that in addition to what the central bank has in the standard app, that all of the proprietary spaces, they integrate within their system the capacity to receive direct transfers through the ACH. We think that is a very critical part of the experience in the space. And we're already seeing use cases where I think there's at least one case in Andrews where a business is now making its weekly salary payments to individuals who've gotten sand dollar interoperable wallets. And for them, it's no extra work than an ordinary ACH file that you drop for salary payments, as long as the individuals have a sand dollar account. So we think that is very important, as well as the importance for, particularly for businesses, when they think about how they manage cash and doing redemption through the ACH route. So that capacity is built into it. So good. So that's, in a general sense, how we operate in terms of the sand dollar infrastructure. But this is now in a context. So we didn't start out say, oh, let's have a central bank digital currency. We focused on access to financial services, financial inclusion, issues around vulnerabilities and resilience in terms of climate change. The minister made mention of Dorian. It took the financial institutions, in some cases, almost 2 years to get back to full service in those communities. Why? Because it's physical. And we're saying things have to be digital, but they have to be inclusive and digital. So there are lots of policy issues around digital inclusion, which I like to say now, digital inclusion, we have to begin to think of almost, same way we think of bread basket items for consumers and whatnot. So access to data has to be considered a bread basket item. And then we have to think a lot about how we make it so that nobody is denied the ability to conclude a transaction because they've run out of paid access to data. So I think that's what's happening. In the case of the Bahamas, the experience has been where the physical footprint of banking has shrunken, and there's an increased cry for more services. But if you read deeply into what people are saying, it is really asking for the payment element of services, depositing, withdrawing cash, and transfers. Yeah, there are issues around access to credit, but those don't require the same sort of, continuous presence in the infrastructure of the services that financial institutions provide. And that's why we believe that if we improve the payments landscape and so that people can get the digital delivery at the end point or the onboarding point for services in an archipelagic setting, that's going to matter. I mean, literally today, you can take a satellite internet system, solar powered if you wish, and immediately reestablish connection. But that connection is not useful if you can't transact services through it. So it isn't really, I think, a far-fetched idea to what resiliency looks like after Category 4 or Category 5 storm. If you have to think about running wires to get back up, or the wireless communications infrastructure being the enabling feature, that's part of what we're up against. And it's recognizing that in getting to this point, a lot of the changes that we've seen in the banking space has to do with the structural cost of banking in this country. And so the shrinking physical branch infrastructure, banks putting more emphasis on digital delivery of services, but there's still lots of gaps. If we look at the branch data over the last decade or so, you will see the shrinkage, particularly in the Family Island. This is shrinkage where, in many cases, a large number of those communities never even had the physical presence. And even in New Providence, you've seen some of that shrinkage, but I don't think New Providence really feels the pinch of the change. And then we see on the upside, the banks have pushed more emphasis into the digital channels for delivery. And, well, you've been reading the news recently. Having an ATM on a Family Island isn't much of a substitute. And the reason why I say that is if you live in New Providence and you think it's difficult to deal with cash, it's harder to operate with cash on a Family Island. Because I like to say to people, cash does not fly commercial in getting to those islands. The banks charter aircraft to take their cash with private security. The government transports its cash to those communities by private charters and communities. So, and if you're a business or an individual on those islands, the equivalent of the ATM is taking a flight to the capital to get a supply of cash and take it back. So that's the reality of dealing in cash on a Family Island community, even though we might say, well, it's not digital and if the lights go off, you're okay. But we still have to push to make that experience different. So banks have made some progress in pushing more of their services out through the electronic channels. And we also know, though, that in terms of the general usage, that there is, though, nationally speaking, a very high usage of cash still. And we think it's going to decrease. Cash is not going to go to zero. We have to be realistic about that. I think some of the more interesting slides in my presentation are the ones that are just to come, but I won't be able to go into them in any great detail. All you need to think about is that they go from some dull color or red all the way to green, and you can think of the transition from the uninteresting color to the green as either meaning that there's an increasing frequency around the use or a more positivity around the perception of the instruments. And when you think about it like that, what you would see is that cash is what people use most frequently for transactions, and far down on that list is, and I don't think this is a perception issue, it's just that it's infancy stage in terms of mobile payments and how often they're being used. And we also have to interpret a lot of what we're seeing still in the digital currency space in terms of the infancy of the technology, and therefore this is a very interesting picture. And again, they're most comfortable using cash, and then when you move to, and this is the flip side. This is very interesting. You also get very interesting differences in terms of how businesses use or are receptive to the various payment instruments versus individuals. And you will also see in the breakdown, if it's legible, that there's a reasonably high usage of the banking platforms relative to the sort of frequency and other views that individuals express around either payment with cash or checks. When you look, say, for example, at how businesses settle payables or how individuals settle payables, you do see that the reliance on the banking, the online infrastructure is increasing for those types of things. But back to my concerns about the burden or the cost of cash, we have to accept that there are status quo, costs around that, and the push to get away from that. And it's not just saying go digital, but enabling that digital transformation in an inclusive way. And there are lots of issues that are involved with that. The financial inclusion issues, the cost structure that businesses encounter, the fact that even in the online system, I think, and I've expressed it, I mean, we still have too many protections around the ease of doing transactions because of the fraud and how we manage those issues. And so a part of that transition is going to be how banks manage those online limits for customers, because if the limits aren't adequate, people will rely on the other inefficient ways to complete large transfers. And I mentioned data as well. And I think in this, some of these are regulatory and policy in nature. Others are just, pushing away at it. On this slide, I talk to what some of those issues could be. The education is in the mix, because a part of, if you go back to the slides on the type of instrument people are using now, and you ask, well, why you don't use this or that? Sometimes it's not feeling confident in their ability to use the tools, but it's also the concern sometimes around the safety of the instruments. And so education goes a very long way in getting people to feel more comfortable. If I drop my wallet and I have cash in it, I might find the wallet, but there's no way I'm going to recover the cash, right? But you lose your access to your online facility, or it's an error in a digital transaction, and sometimes it's difficult, but your recoverability prospects are much better than the physical instruments. So when people start to talk about the digital versus the physical, they also need to better understand some of the risk in the physical space that's not present in the digital space. But there are regulatory issues that we have to deal with. And one, for example, that I think is important is, I mean, we say it here in very technical terms, but what I call discriminatory point of sale practices in rates of exchange. Now that's a nice way of saying that sometimes when you pay with a credit card, you don't get the same price as somebody who pays with cash. That should not be the case. So I think this is an example where regulation will be able to make a difference. It's already been flagged by the Ministry for Consumer Affairs, and the central bank is on side with that one. And again, the sand dollar fits into the space because we speak now to digital adoption and the inclusivity issues. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of what's on the slides, but like, as I mentioned, it just slotted in an overall emphasis on modernizing the payments infrastructure. And you can think about how if you enable people to be nimble from a digital point of view, your recovery playbook starts to look different. And so that's the upside of this process. I think I have about, what, 10, 15? I was calculating based on the 40 minutes, but anyway. The other point is that it is a public good. So for the policymakers, and I won't go into too much to that, but it's a public good. In the Bahamas case, it may not be a public good in some other countries, because in some other countries, the private sector might be sufficiently motivated to do certain things to get payments to a better state. But we know, because we invested in the RTGS in the Bahamas, and we got the banks to do it for the ACH, but government also provided seed capital to get the stock exchange started. And there are other examples like that where we have to appreciate that often the equivalent of government or the public sector matters. And this is just a little bit about the history in terms of how we got to this point, but what is very important in doing this is to think about all of the issues that relate to financial inclusion, financial integrity, et cetera, and how you build those into policy. And one of those, when you start to talk about interoperability, the powerful thing about interoperability in consumer choices, then it doesn't matter where you go in the system, you can still do certain things, as opposed to wondering whether that piece of the ecosystem has critical mass and you should be there versus the other. So having interoperability is a big plus in terms of the competitive side of financial services, and whether somebody wants a plain vanilla experience or all the bells and whistles, they can still send and receive monies. And there's the equivalence in terms of the integrity of getting on board for payment services and banking services, because eventually the banks are also going to be in this space. That's very critical for where we go on in the adoptions space. And if you read between the lines and all of the regulatory reforms that were taking place in the last decade or half decade, a lot of those prepared us for this, as well as we were very timely in terms of the amendments that took place in the central banking framework to provide for the digital currency as being a part of the possibilities. We also deliberately in the central bank framework opened up the space so that non-banks could be providers of payment services. So once you do that, then it means too that when they came with their apps, we needed to make sure that they could speak to each other. So that really accelerated how we came to the idea of having the digital currency, because we realized that you had the opportunity to address interoperability at an earlier stage of the adoptions process than many other countries, where it is still a challenge. But we're still very early in this process. We have, I would say, a reasonably wide reach. At least a fifth of the population who have some access on some level to banking services. But until we get the merchant system more developed and we get more banks involved, and that's part of our emphasis in the near term, then I think we're not going to see the sort of momentum that we know will come on the adoption side. And so we have one commercial bank that is already working through the process. And we have a playbook that we're refining in terms of how we engage the commercial banks individually. And that would address both how they provide mobile payment services to access to their merchant clients as well as more of the retail customer base. Because the convenience for most people as well is that they want to have these services as an extension of, in many cases, the existing relationships that they have. And so we know that enabling that is going to support some of the adoptions issue. So I think we've made a very important initial gain in terms of tying into the legacy payment system. And now we have to make certain that all of the third-party apps provide that interoperability. That interoperability exists insofar as the central bank app is concerned. We're also focusing what we like to call a wallet 2.0, which will allow individuals, at least at the level 1 level, to get plugged in for any provider that is in the system right now in terms of getting started, and then they can deepen the relationship. Because, again, a lot of people are anxious to activate wallets, and the authentication process for that means that for some of them, they aren't getting it as seamlessly in the apps that they would like to get onboarded. So that's why we're putting a lot of emphasis on the current wallet, as well as how merchant services can be provided for financial institutions that may want to structure the fee structure around the merchant services that they provide. We're also focused on the education and the awareness side, and a part of that is incentivizing people to give it a try. So that is something we started last year, and we see it becoming more entrenched as well as we moving through the family islands. And a lot of times it's the cultural events that's a good place for people to get that experience. But beyond that, we need to focus on some other issues. We've pulled in also what we call ambassadors, average users, so who can do a lot more of the legwork in terms of helping people understand how to use the application. And that's, we think, is very important, particularly in the family islands, where we're now beginning to do more work. And then the other thing that I would say is that we beginning to work with the government. So we've been in discussions with the Ministry of Finance since last year as to how we transfer this experience to what I call the cash districts of the government. So that's, again, a familiarization process with those communities that we are working on. And then the banks are also very, very important. There are lots of lessons, but I think most critical is, the tailored public education, having the government in there. And I know we might look at the government and its cash versus not cash posture. But one of the most important contributions that the government makes in a lot of these types of reforms is just helping get through the regulatory reforms that need to get adopted, right? And that process, I think, has been a very smooth one insofar as the transformation of the payments infrastructure and a lot of the other types of reforms that we've seen happen in the financial services space across the political divide. So I think that's something positive that we should continue to nurture. So just to mention, just by way of conclusion as well, that there's only one bullet on this that I would like to stress, and that is we are mindful that everything has to be compliant and consistent as well with the global norms. And that was supposed to be a part of this presentation, but part of that global norm is that we have, at the G20 level, a target for 2027, where any of you should be able to send a payment from Nassau to London or Tokyo and have a recipient receive that payment within a few minutes, not days or hours. So do the backward calculation based upon what you have now in the Bahamas and try to infer whether you think if you're initiating that process today in the Bahamas, it will achieve that. Probably not. Well, I shouldn't say probably not, definitely not. So if you don't make the transformations that are needed between now and 2027, when 2027 comes and others luckily are enjoying that advantage, we may not be experiencing that advantage if we don't ensure that the transformation takes place internally to allow us to interface with the rest of the world on the same speed. And that is really peer-to-peer payments, remittances, and those, just using those as examples, not the very large payments, because the very large payments can probably find ways now to settle. And a part of that target is that the average cost of those transfers is going to be, I know it's less than 5%, it's probably less than 3%, but don't quote me on the exact number. And I'm saying that because now it costs some people 8% and more of the value of what they're sending to get monies from wherever they are to some places in the world. And some of those high costs may well be in experiences that are local. So that too is something that we need to bear in mind in terms of some of the targets around the transformation of the payment system. But for us, the focus is really now on more of the enabling infrastructure and systems that support increased adoptions. Thank you.
I know you asked for any questions, but you only get 2. That's it. That's all I can allow. 2 questions. All right? All right. Okay. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you for
Questions.
thank you for the presentation. I learned a lot from it. Could you help me to understand some more how sand dollar is created? I'm thinking in terms of the money supply process. Is it that people can withdraw deposits and convert it into sand dollars? Is it that if you have cash, you can now go to the central bank and exchange it? And my second question is, I've done this for other parts of the Caribbean, but unfortunately not for Bahamas. Do you have a sense of the size of the underground economy?
We don't, I think, have a full sense of the size of the economy, but so I guess you can use some of the rules of thumbs. But I think in many respects, some of the incentive structures that we have in the Bahamas should suppress underground economic activities. Not that it's going to get rid of it, but in the process, we think about this as being cash. So everything that governs how sand dollars are created looks similar to when the central bank has any variations in its other liabilities. So yes, if somebody cashes out of a bank deposit, they can get digital currency, and that means at the end of the accounting process that the banks already had a claim on the central bank that they shifted from themselves to whomever is getting the cash or the currency. So we didn't create a new system, we just created a technology to do it similarly. So even down to the process of how the currency is minted and the controls that are on it, and the way in practice how we distinguish between a stockpile of printed notes, which is not real money until it's issued. We have those same sort of controls at the digital level.
Yes.
It's a little bit of an extension from that question. We talked a little bit about the applicability of this for small businesses, not-for-profits, faith-based organizations. But we did a study coming out of the crisis of Hurricane Dorian and then COVID on the businesses in Grand Bahama and Abaco. And what we estimated in that study lined up with what we heard previous estimation, that there was an informal economy of about 20 to 30%. And a lot of the challenges were around ease of doing business, not wanting to get involved in the red tape. But what we found is obviously that made them tremendously vulnerable for disaster risk reduction, and there was no formal footing. How are we thinking about utilizing sand dollar to hopefully bring the informal into a more formalized scenario? Those little side gigs on the side that make a huge difference. How do we
I think it reduces to just putting a lot more deliberate effort on making it easier for individuals to open up or establish relationships with financial institutions. So that's been a big part of this process. So you get to think through a lot more of the practical problems, and that's why even last year we made some amendments to what are acceptable identity documents for people who are onboarding for account relationships. And you recognize that sometimes, yeah, you might say that you have a side gig, right? But you want to be careful if you're providing services that you don't try to treat them so much, like a large enterprise, when all of us, it may just be a plumber or an electrician. You should treat them as, in their personal capacity in many cases, and getting them established for financial relationships. So those are the issues we thought through, and we continue to look at those because I think it's going to be important, particularly the extent of informality that might exist outside of New Providence and Grand Bahama.
Ladies and gentlemen, Governor John Road, thank you.
Okay. Oh, well, doesn't matter. Okay, so.
So when you're a moderator, when you have to keep time, you have to sometimes go into dictatorial mode. So we're gonna, everybody say 60 seconds. Yeah, there's 60 seconds in every minute. You got like 3 minutes for coffee. Literally 3 minutes. Ministers, thank you so very much. President, thank you very much. Governor, thank you very much. 3 minutes for coffee. And then we go into our next session.